Hello Brandy.
Hello.
Merci de nous accorder cet entretien aujourd'hui en direct de la manifestation pour la liberté vaccinale. Alors votre témoignage ce matin était extrêmement précieux puisque vous étiez une cadre de haut niveau chez Merck, comme vous l'expliquez justement dans votre témoignage, l'un des plus puissants groupes pharmaceutiques de la planète, et vous l'avez quitté après avoir compris que le Vioxx, médicament que vous aviez participé à commercialiser vous-même avec votre équipe, avait finalement causé la mort de plusieurs centaines de milliers de patients à travers le monde. Encore plus grave, vous avancez que Merck connaissait parfaitement la dangerosité du Vioxx et que la compagnie a sciemment masqué ses données de létalité. Vous confirmez cela à ce jour?
What happened was there was a study, they were trying to prove that there were less stomach incidences with Vioxx versus a placebo. And what was happening with the data was that actually there was a 4 times increased death risk in the Vioxx category, 2 to 4 times, and with many heart attacks and strokes. And instead of releasing that part of the data set, they released only information about stomach maladies. And obviously, they didn't get away with that for very long. The New York Times found out, there was an article in the New York Times, but in between that and the time it was pulled off the market was about 1 to 2 years. So the information was even out there in the public, and the FDA still hadn't pulled it yet. So.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler un peu plus en détail justement de votre parcours, comment vous êtes arrivé à sortir de chez Merck et qu'est-ce qui s'est passé dans votre vie après ça?
So after working for Merck, after seeing the corruption from the inside, I left the company because I was very disturbed by how little they seem to care about people and health, and how much they seem to care only about money. And I went to live in Europe after that, and I saw how health is done a little bit differently, particularly in Holland, where I was. And I was blessed to have my son over there, and I changed my mindset. I'd already discovered the corruption, so I didn't trust the pharmaceutical industry. But being American, we're raised to believe that the doctors know everything, and every time you have a small issue, you run to the doctor. And I saw a complete opposite of that in Holland, and people were far healthier. So then when I had my son and I went back to the US, and I was pressured by a doctor to vaccinate my son, even though he had no vaccines at that point, I said, no, I'm going to do my research first. He said, I'm the doctor, I've done the research. And I said, I know where you get your research. I used to work for Merck and call on pediatricians, so I will do my own research. He didn't like that at all, left the room, and my son is vaccine-free today after everything that I learned. And it was far worse than even what I saw with Vioxx, because children are literally dying and being harmed and ending up with lifelong, life-destroying chronic illness and things like autism and paralysis and nervous system issues and developmental issues, as well as autoimmune and type 1 diabetes, things like that. And now in the US, one in every other child, so half of the childhood population, is sick with chronic illness. And this is not the case in other developed countries where they vaccinate far less.
On va parler des autres pays après. Je voudrais encore avoir votre impression. Vous n'avez pas peur des représailles par rapport au fait que maintenant vous ouvrez la bouche, vous avez une parole libre, alors qu'avant non?
Yeah, I've been speaking out for 2 years. I got involved when the fight for, when Merck was pushing a mandatory vaccine law for school in California. And it's very similar to the one in France, where it will require upwards of 30 vaccine shots, so doses before school. Otherwise, the child can't go to school. And there's also pressure in terms of the child protective services in the US as well. So I started speaking out then, and my life changed very quickly. I guess I wasn't, when you work in the pharmaceutical industry, you know, they make it clear that they watch everything you do when you're an employee, and they know every move you make. And you can imagine they don't play nicely with employees who speak out, and they have obviously not been so nice. I get, well, they broke into my house a few times. There were a lot of intimidation tactics used. They hacked my bank accounts at one of the largest banks in the US. The fraud department called me and said, "We've never seen the kind of hacking attempts that your accounts have been on. We are taking all of your accounts offline." He actually said, "I've worked for the fraud department for 20 years and I've never seen anything like it. Who did you piss off?" And I said, "Well, let me tell you." So they're constantly hacking into everything. My website's always down, always into the PayPal, LinkedIn, my email, my phones. They crash a computer every 6 months.
Peut-être que bientôt ça sera nous.
No.
No.
But yes, so there's a lot, and my life changed that day. And but instead of silencing me, it made me want to fight even harder, because you know you're right when they come after you like that. I know I'm right anyway, but it just spurred me to do what I'm doing, and I feel like it's my calling in life. So I won't stop, and I won't be silenced.
En tout cas, aujourd'hui, vous avez la parole libre. Vous nous dites que les vaccins sont moins testés que les médicaments avant leur mise sur le marché. Comment c'est possible?
So a lot of the European countries are relying on data from the United States on vaccines, and a lot of the science coming out of the US, is biased. A lot of the pharmaceutical companies are in the academic research and in the research institutions, and they're controlling what is released and how the studies are done and the data that's manipulated. But also with vaccines, they're not qualified as a pharmaceutical drug or a pharmaceutical treatment as such by the FDA, by the US government. They're classified as a biologique. So they do not undergo the same level of testing as pharmaceutical drugs. They undergo far less. And when I was at Merck, we were always taught that the gold standard for pharmaceutical drug testing was a placebo-based, double-blind, placebo-based long-term study. And vaccines do not have to be subjected to that. So there are no placebos in vaccine trials. So if you are studying just one vaccine against another vaccine, but they both contain the same toxic chemicals and they're causing the same amount of health damage, it doesn't mean they're safe, because there's just as much health damage in both groups. And so without a real placebo, you can't determine safety, and the pharmaceutical companies can get away with saying things are safe when they're clearly not. Because if you actually read the product insert in the vaccine boxes, which the doctors never show you, it lists all of the health issues that we're seeing throughout the US and throughout the world, but in the US more. It listed in black and white on the insert that this has been reported frequently enough to be on the insert as a side effect of the vaccinations.
Par rapport aux États-Unis, Trump avait promis une enquête fédérale justement entre le lien supposé entre autisme régressif et vaccination justement précoce par le ROR. Qu'est-ce qu'il en est aujourd'hui?
My personal opinion on that is that Trump has realized that there is damage, including autism, from vaccines, and he's seen it directly. And he had very good intentions with bringing that up and making that, exposing that to the public. But I think when he got into office, things were not quite as he expected. And the pressure was probably a lot more intense than he was used to and than he expected. And things have gone a bit silent since then, and it's very disappointing. I'm not completely surprised. The powers that are running the country and the industry are very powerful.
Donc les États-Unis se débattent avec une controverse scientifique qui fait rage, la pertinence d'une vaccination anti-varicelle. La France est provisoirement épargnée. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
So chickenpox is one of the vaccines on the schedule in the US, and most children are vaccinated against the chickenpox. Most of Europe and most of the rest of the world considers chickenpox very benign, and it is. In fact, I had it myself, and everyone I know my age had it. And, sometimes we need these childhood diseases to stimulate our immune system and keep it going, like gas in a car. And we need these exposures to be able to fight bigger things that come along later in life. And when there's a place for them. But it's a profitable vaccine. And when there's money to be made, pharmaceutical companies don't prioritize health, they prioritize profit. So it is a recommended and now a mandated vaccine in California. It's a great example of how, there are many populations in the world that aren't vaccinated against it at all, and it's not a problem. But when you have a product to sell, then you create fear around that disease so that you can sell the vaccine. And that's exactly what has been happening in the US. And now people 10, 20 years younger than I am fear chickenpox when everybody had it when I was younger, and we had chickenpox parties, and it was a good thing to get, right? Because it keeps your immune system going. It means you're healthy. It's, and now they've turned that into fear so that they can sell the vaccine.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez justement du futur? C'est quoi votre position? Quel est votre avis là-dessus? Pessimiste?
We have lost some battles recently, like within Italy and California. But what I see is more and more people waking up every day. And pharmaceutical companies and the governments are really cracking down and trying to mandate vaccines because they see this group of people who is starting to realize that we've all been lied to, and that vaccines are never saved us historically, and they don't create immunity, and they actually cause health damage, which creates pharmaceutical customers. So there are a lot of people waking up to this. And unfortunately, because the pharmaceutical companies have had their plans in place for quite a while, I do think it may get a bit darker before it gets lighter. But there are more and more and more people waking up every day, and more people speaking out, like you being brave enough to cover this subject. And eventually we will reach a tipping point where more people know to question vaccines than just follow blindly. And I do believe there will be a change for the better. It may take 5 or 10 years, and it may get a little harder in the meantime. And I hate that, because I hate to think of all the children that are suffering. But I do believe there is hope.
Justement, le mot de la fin, je vais vous le laisser. Il y a des millions, des milliards d'internautes, on espère, qui vont nous voir. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez leur transmettre pour conclure cet entretien? Peut-être un message d'espoir.
Well, we definitely, we have a battle ahead of us, and we are losing some of the battles here and there, but there is a lot of small victories and a lot of momentum moving in the right direction. And, as I close my speech today, the pharmaceutical companies have a lot of money and they have a lot of power right now, but we have the voice of truth, and truth cannot be bought.